Hello and welcome everyone. We will be starting at 6:05.
Hello and welcome. We'll be starting at 6:05. Give everybody a chance to get settled in. Start in just a few moments.
Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's Master Gardener webinar, Soil, the Universe Beneath Your Feet. We're so glad you've joined us and we know you'll learn a lot tonight. The Master Gardener coordinator for this evening is Gail Burt. Take it away, Gail.
Thank you, Serenity. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. As Serenity said, my name is Gail Burt. I am a Master Gardener volunteer and tonight's facilitator. This program is co-sponsored by the Contra Costa County Libraries and the University of California Master Gardeners. Just a little housekeeping to get started. This event will be recorded for educational and promotional use by the University of California. The recorded presentations will be available on YouTube just shortly after the conclusion of this event. All participants will be muted and your videos will be turned off throughout the presentation. Closed captioning is available. You could click on the closed captioning or there is an icon down in the bottom right corner called Live Transcript, which you could follow along. And it will also be available on the YouTube recorded version. We have two sets of question and answer sessions. We will conduct one in the middle of our talk, and then a longer Q&A session towards the end of this talk. We're fortunate to have a very expert group of Master Gardener volunteers joining us tonight. So I want to say thank you to Monica, Sarah, and Brian for assisting us tonight. We will, if you're attending on the live stream, please submit your questions through the chat. If you are on this Zoom presentation, use the Q&A box or icon at the bottom to submit your questions. We will not be using the chat in this on the Zoom version of this program. So I just also would ask that you would hold maybe some of your questions until John has had an opportunity to go through some of his presentation, because he may very well answer some of those questions. Our hope is that you will find that many of your questions will be answered through his presentation. And then if you still have additional questions, by all means, type them into the Q&A. And our panel of Master Gardener volunteers will be answering as we go along. So in starting, the UC Master Gardener program of Contra Costa County's mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information on horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscaping practices to the residents of Contra Costa County. That is you. Tonight, our speaker is John Fike. Born and raised in Southern California, John received an undergraduate degree in biology in 1970. He finished his graduate training in 1978 at Colorado State University and spent his entire 34-year career on the faculty of UCSF. After retiring, he became active in the Master Gardener program for Contra Costa County, and his passion for biology and his interest in education have been instrumental in his contributions to this organization. One of John's goals as a Master Gardener is to introduce more science into the gardening landscape in the hopes that people will develop an enhanced perspective and appreciation for the fascinating world around us. So now I'd like to turn it over to John.
Thank you, Gail. Appreciate it. Thank you for a very gracious introduction. And yes, I am a scientist. Don't hold that against me. I'm going to give you a little bit of science tonight, but I'm hoping that you get a better feel for soil. This is a good topic. It's near and dear to me, and I hope by the end of this talk, it'll be near and dear to you, or nearer and dearer to you. Master gardeners in our webinars often start with either this slide or a similar slide, talking about the 4 important elements for success in the garden. It doesn't matter what kind of garden you have, and that's soil, water, sun, and air. Now, I'm talking about the soil tonight, but I'm going to integrate how aeration and sun and water all work together for the integrity of soil and for the vitality of the soil. Now, I entitled my talk, "The Universe Beneath Your Feet." And I did that because I think many of us don't really appreciate what's going on down under the ground. And my goal today is not to solve all the soil problems in the county, but rather to give you a different perspective about soil. I want at the end of this that you think about soil differently, because it is a resource we need to cherish and work with carefully in order to maintain it. So first of all, before I get into the nuts and bolts, I want you to look at this picture. I took this last October in Colorado. This is near Aspen, Colorado. And these mountains are called the Maroon Bells right here. This is surprisingly enough, Maroon Lake. Very beautiful valley. So what I want you to see is in the foreground, you have some grasses and some shrubs and so forth going up to the trees. But the stars of the show are the aspen trees that are in their full autumn glory right now. Interspersed with the aspen trees are the conifers that are indigenous to the Rocky Mountains. So why exactly am I showing you this picture? Because there's something here that's so fundamental we should think about. Nobody has ever drawn a plow up through this valley. Nobody's ever used a rototiller there or used a shovel to open wide areas. Nobody's ever walked through those trees with a bag of balanced synthetic fertilizer and thrown it out there to feed the trees and the shrubs. Nobody has walked in this valley with a backpack sprayer full of biocides. That would be herbicide or insecticide or fungicide or miticide or any other kind of side. And with the exception of wildlife, which is pretty interesting up here, and some intrepid hikers, this valley has not really been walked upon. Nobody's tilled it, nobody's walked upon it, nobody's done any kind of augmentation of it, and look at how well it's doing. That's telling us that nature has devised mechanism or ways to provide everything that these plants need to thrive. And I want you to think about that. Yes, there's no tomatoes up there or strawberries or peach trees, but the biological can't think of the word, the biological processes that are going on in this valley are going on in your backyard as well. And we need to understand them and try to augment them and help them along the way. A lot of people, including me, like to use quotations sometimes, generally a quotation from somebody far wiser or smarter or insightful than me. And this is a Greek philosopher and historian from a long time ago, 400 BC, who said, to be a successful farmer, or you could say gardener, one must first know the nature of the soil. And that's what I'm going to talk to you tonight about, the nature of the soil, but maybe from a perspective you've never thought about. So what is soil? Master gardeners always like to answer any science or any gardening question with this. Well, it depends. It depends upon your perspective about what soil is. If you were a soil engineer or a mining engineer, you see soil as something to build upon or to dig through. If you are a geologist, you might look at soil simply from the mineral component of the rocks that soil came from. Or if you're a gardener like me, you might view it as a nurturing environment for flowers and vegetables or trees. Another thing soil is an amazingly complex topic. In fact, there's estimated to be 42,000 scholarly papers published annually on the topic of soil science. That ranges from geology to chemistry to biology to big agriculture. I spent my whole life in academia. I know how hard it is to publish scholarly papers, if you want to call them that. It takes a lot of time and effort. That means that the people power going into studying the soil is astounding. And we're learning things because of the technologies that have evolved over the last few years that we never knew before. So what I say today may or may not be relevant in 5 years. Probably will, but there may be a few things. But we're learning so much more about soil. Now, to try to understand the complexity of soil science is kind of like this, a daunting task. And one that we shouldn't worry about. Let's worry about concepts. I'm going to stay with concepts tonight. Yeah, I'm going to give you some factoids along the way, but I want to keep coming back with the conceptual element of what soil is, how we take care of it, and how it helps our plants grow. So let's talk about soil composition. Do a little of the physical part of soil. What is soil? Whether it's a handful or a wheelbarrow load or a shovelful, what's it made out of? What part of it? And that brings us to our first poll, because what I want to do as Gail launches this poll is ask what you think in terms of air. How much air is in soil? Can you launch the poll, Gail, or is it hung up? There you go. So I'm just asking you, there's no trick to this. There's no trick to this at all. I just want to know what you think. How much air do you think is in soil? Most people don't think about air being in soil. And it's one of those elements I think we need. It's so important to the integrity and the biology of the soil. It's something we need to consider. And the numbers are coming in. That looks pretty impressive. I'm impressed with the answers. So are we almost there, Gail?
We're almost there. We'll give it another couple seconds, but I think we've got pretty clear
We've got
leaning.
Yeah, we've got it. And it looks like pretty much everybody's leaning to the high end of things, of 10 or 25%. So are we done with the poll?
I'll end that poll.
Okay, there you go. So most of you, 68% of you chimed in and said 25%. And in fact, that's true. So I would love if we were live, I would pick somebody out who voted for 25 and say, why did you pick 25%? Because plants need air. We don't think about that. Plants have a respiration like we do. Well, it's different, but biochemically it's the same. They have respiration. Microorganisms, which I'm going to talk a lot about, need air. Everything needs air, but you don't think about that as part of soil. So when you look, this is one of the take-home messages I'd like you to remember after this talk. This is kind of the generic composition of soil. We talked about the air, 25% volume, whether it's a handful or a shovelful or a truckload. 25% of that volume is air. 25% is water in a good case scenario. That's what we call the pore space, which is very critical to soil. Then we have the solid phase of soil. We have the lion's share of it is the inorganic minerals. This is the component that came from rock. Soil comes from decomposed rock that takes millions of years to happen. Whether it's granite or lava, it breaks down into what we call topsoil. That's the inorganic minerals. And the other solid component, which I'm going to talk a good bit about, is the organic part. But this is really important. The absolute numbers, not so much, as you have air, water, minerals, and organics in a good soil. So let's talk just about, for a minute, just about the minerals. This is the part that comes from rocks. These are some of the elements or the minerals that we see in soil. We have macronutrients, and they're only called macronutrients because there are more of them than the trace elements over here. Most of the trace nutrients are metals, iron, zinc, copper, and they are critically important to certain biochemical reactions in the soil, in the microorganisms, in the plants. This is very important to the integrity of soil. Now, when you go to the box store or you go to a garden store and you buy a bag of garden soil or potting soil, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but I can tell you what not in there very much is this. There's not many minerals in those bag soils. In fact, here's three. I took the pictures just the day before yesterday of three different products. The bottom two, the yellow one and the blue one, you don't have to read all this stuff. The yellow one and the blue one said soil in their title. The brown one up here said potting mix or some such thing. But if you look at them, all of them, what's one of the first products that you see? Forest products. These are forest products. And what you don't see very much is minerals. Now, in these two soils, they have a thing called perlite. If you've ever opened a bag of soil that has that white, those little white particles, that's perlite. Perlite actually is a mineral, but it's used in these products for aeration, to keep air in the soil. And the thing about perlite, it's kind of locked. You can't get the minerals out of it. So my whole point is that while there's nothing wrong with these products at all. They are amendments for the soil, but they're not really soil because they don't have the minerals in there. Now, I'm going to push a webinar that's going to happen a month from now. One of my colleagues who's answering questions, Monica, tonight, she's going to give talk on soil and amendments, and she will enhance what I say, I hope, by going in more detail about fertilizers and amendments. But I'm just saying that sometimes you got to read the ingredients, what you buy, to make sure, or if you buy in bulk from a soil landscape place, make sure they're giving you some minerals, not just forest products. So the next thing about soil is texture, the texture of your soil, and that's the components. They're the mineral fraction of the soil, and we know them as sand, silt, and clay. That's what makes up soil texture. And these are particles that are differentiated from one another based on size. Sand is the most coarse size. You can see over here the size up to 2 millimeters in size for a soil particle. That's a big particle, down to the finest particle of all, which is clay. You have all of these, and now I'm handpicking the pros and cons for my own, but try to make some points. Sand. Sandy soil is very low in organics. It does not hold on to moisture very well at all. Think about a beach. If you walk on a beach and a wave washes in, the water vanishes. Why? Because it just goes right down through the soil. Because it doesn't hold moisture, it doesn't hold nutrients very well either. And nutrients leach out of sandy soil very easily. Now, silt is smaller than sand, but bigger than clay, and it's better at retaining moisture and nutrients. Now, why is it better? We have to get into electrostatic properties and all this chemistry and physics. I don't want to get into that. So you just have to take my word for it. The silt is smaller than sand, but it's better at holding on to stuff. And the best thing of all is clay. Now, if we were all here in a room and I could say, how many of you are familiar with clay? I bet almost everybody in the county would raise their hand. And in a lot of ways, in a negative way, clay is hard to work with, but you know what? Clay is the most nutritious soil there is. It's just loaded with minerals and nutrients because of the size of the particles and the charges, the electrostatic charges holds on to stuff. But we all know that it's highly susceptible to compaction in the wintertime. If you step on it, you push out all that air and it gets to be a mess. And right now it's hard as a rock. But what we really are all faced with is loamy soils. That's what we have. Loamy soils is a combination of these three texture elements. If we had equal amounts of sand, silt, and clay, we'd probably have the perfect soil, but we don't. But what we have is a combination. We get good water and nutrient holding capacity from the silt and the clay, and we get good infiltration of air and water from the sand. Most of us in this county, I don't know where everybody is from, but most of us in Contra Costa County have clay loam soil. Clay is the heavy element, but we also have sand and silt in there. And there's nothing wrong with clay. You just have to augment it with lots of organics. It makes a wonderful soil. Another aspect of soil in terms of its structure are called aggregates. And sand, silt, and clay are attracted to one another for a variety of chemical and physical reasons, which I'm not going to go into. And they also glom onto organic material. And these form aggregates, which store and supply lots of nutrients for plants. And they also provide small and large pores for what? Water and air. You remember two major elements in soil. I read an article recently, and the author likened soil aggregates to grape nut cereal. I don't know how many of you have known or do know about grape nut soil, little aggregates, little crunchy things. That's what soil aggregates are. They're down there, but they help pass the nutrients on to the plants. So what's the bottom line for you and me in our soil at home? You know what? Your soil is what you have, and you're not going to change it. We have clay loam soil here. We can't change the base, but what you can do is enrich it with organics and so forth. You'll hear a lot more of that in the fertilizer and amendment talk in a month, but I'll keep hitting it. Adding organics is really important to soil health. No matter what you have, if you're going to do a bed in your native soil, your clay soil, your clay loam soil, or if you're going to make a raised bed with purchased soil you get from a landscape company or somewhere, you might want to test that soil. Or if you're having problems with certain plants in your yard, you might want to test it. Why? Because you can find out if you have too much or too little of something. if you're missing some critical minerals, or if you have much of it. To find out what your pH, that is the acidity or the alkalinity of soil. pH is a 14-point scale. 7 is in the middle, 7 is neutral. That's where plants like to be. 6.8 to 7.2, they like to be in that. Some plants like blueberries like more acid soil, but nonetheless, most of the time, plants like a neutral soil. And most of our soils here, our clay loam, is in fact neutral or near neutral. But you want to find out what it is. And a good soil test will not only provide what's there or what's not there, but it'll provide strategies to fix it. Now, as master gardeners, we don't endorse any particular testing laboratory, but we have a handout, which I think we'll put in the chat, I hope, of 4 labs that have been vetted by our help desk people that give good soil tests. I recommend that you do that. You don't have to do it, but I recommend it because sometimes it's nice to know what you're starting with and what you can do to improve it. So we're back now to our soil composition. The thing I want you to remember, like I say, the pore space will change with drought, will change with weather. But basically just know air, water, organics, and inorganic minerals. That's what makes soil healthy. Now I'm going to talk about this part. This is the organic part. Most papers or most articles say most gardens have soil organics of 1 to 5%. Our demonstration garden in Walnut Creek is 10 to 15% because we've integrated so much organics over time. Nonetheless, I'm going to just talk about this component. What is this made out of? This 5%, what's it made of? So this represents that 5%. You have fresh residue, which means newly dyed plants or animals. A third to half of that 5% is actively decomposing organic material. Things are breaking down right now. About equal amount of stabilized organic material, which can't be broken down any farther. And then you have, of that 5%, you have 5% of that, which is living organisms. So what does all this mean with respect to soil? Well, it means it's alive. I hope at the end of this, you'll jump for joy like this lady. Probably not, but at least you could be happy that soil is alive. And that's one of the take-home messages that I want to give. Okay, some critics say that soil is minerals, water, and air, and it is not alive. Only the microorganisms are alive. Okay, but that's splitting hairs. For me, I'm going to say soil is alive because of what's in there. And I'm going to tell you what's in there because you're probably asking yourself or asking me, John, how alive is it? Well, we're going to go into that. And in order to do that, I need to use a sophisticated analytical tool. What's an analytical tool? It's a tool that allows you to get a number or a value of something. So my sophisticated analytical tool is a teaspoon. You might have one at your house. I have multiple ones. I have brightly colored plastic ones in my garage, so I won't lose them. 1 teaspoon holds about 4.2 grams of soil. There's 453 grams per pound. So this is a fraction by, you know how much coffee or sugar or anything will fit in a level teaspoon. Not very much. So before I give you the answer, my last poll, I'm going to ask you how many bacteria do you think will fit in that 1 teaspoon of garden soil? And you see the choices come from, well, many to really a lot to kind of a spooky number. So I want to say, what do you think? Like I say, there's no trick to this. I'm just figuring out, gee, what might you think would fit in a teaspoon of soil? Teaspoon of soil is not very much. So if you extrapolate that into the bigger thing, which we'll do, you see there's a lot going on down under our feet. That's what I call it, the universe beneath our feet. So we're getting there, and we're getting a spectrum here of choices, which is what I would expect to see. And Gail, anytime you want to stop it, you can. We've got about 75% of the people who have responded. So and it's not going up anymore. So should we share results? I guess so. Did everybody see that? I don't know if they can see that. So what we're seeing is a spectrum of changes, but people are thinking that it's the high number, spooky number, and in fact, it is the spooky number. It's greater than 3 billion with a B, That's in that 1 teaspoon of soil. When you look at soil like this, at the end of this talk, you will be able to tell me what's wrong with this picture. But nonetheless, when you look at this picture, you see all this soil and you go, doesn't look very alive to me. If you think 3 billion in a teaspoon, how much could be out there? Well, it's kind of looking at the ocean also. You go, well, it's a beautiful, nice blue ocean, but it doesn't look very, very alive to me until you look under the surface. And then you see this. This is macroscopic. In other words, we can see it with our eyes without any lenses or microscopes. What an incredible ecosystem under the surface of the sea. It's the same in the soil, except we can't see them. These are microscopic creatures. So let's go and look at that. What is in 1 teaspoon of soil? Well, we've already said the bacteria. And you see the number here is 4 billion with a B. I read a scientific article from a soil scientist at Davis, and he said there's about 1 billion bacteria per gram of soil. There's 4 grams in that teaspoon, therefore I get this. You look at this bacteria, this is called a bacillus. It's the shape of them. And you see all these little tails here, those are called flagella. What are they for? For them to swim. Where do they swim? Well, there's water in soil. Remember, 25% of it is water, not dripping soil, not puddled water, microscopic water that's held onto those soil aggregates that I talked about. We can't get into all the physics behind that, A, because I don't understand it all, but B, it's not important. Only there's a lot of bacteria there. Next in line in terms of numbers are almost 500 million things called actinomycetes. We look at these individual things that are like links on a chain, and they kind of the shape of this. So people thought, well, it must be a bacterium. Then other people weighed in and go, yeah, but look at how they're big, long chains. So they must be a fungus. Some people said, well, maybe they're the missing link. Well, no. Our sophisticated technologies now have come up and said, these guys are bacteria. So why didn't I just lump them over here with that? Well, because these are kind of important to the soil. If you go out tomorrow morning into your garden bed, assuming your cat and dog haven't been there, and you pick up a double handful and hold it to your face, that smell, that rich smell of earth is actinomycetes. That's why I bring it up. Next in line in terms of number, which is a very important group of microorganisms in the soil called fungi. There's 4 million of them in that teaspoon. There's also about 400,000 algae. Algae, you think algae, why would algae be in soil? Because there's water in the soil. If you took a sample maybe out in the Delta or in the southeast part of the United States, you'd probably get higher numbers, but it doesn't matter. There's lots of algae, and there's quite a number of protozoans. Somewhere in your educational lifetime, you were introduced to protozoa, and it was through an amoeba maybe. You know the amoeba that crawl along the bottom of ponds or wherever they live. Well, there's other single-celled animals as well. They're in the protozoan family. These are called paramecium. And you see the fuzz around the edge of this one? Those are called cilia, and that's how they swim, once again. And I will tell you why these guys are important. And lastly, you see nematodes. About 5, these are microscopic roundworms, and I'll tell you what they do as well. These all are in 1 teaspoon of soil. Now, if you took a shovelful of that same soil, you're going to see earthworms or maybe an arthropod, which would be an insect or a millipede or something. If you took a truckload, you might get a gopher or a mole. I would say that soil is alive based on this. So what are all these microorganisms doing? And that's the critical part. They are enriching your soil. They are up in that valley in Colorado, making that that valley gorgeous, because these microorganisms are interacting with one another. They're competing for minerals. They're competing for other nutrients like nitrogen and carbon. They're recycling them. They're getting these minerals into their body, and then they are consumed by another organism, and the excess nutrients are passed out into the soil. And by doing that, they are enriching the soil. It's very critical to good soil health, and good soil health is critical to good plant health. Brings us to the soil food web. Don't even try to read all these things unless you want to. That's not the point. The point is, here are all these organisms I talked about, the millions of organisms, and they're all interacting with one another. You see the arrows going every which way. And that's really critical. What would happen if you lost this fungus? You would have upstream and downstream effects in your soil food web. Soil food web is absolutely critical to good soil health, which is absolutely critical to maintaining your garden ecosystem. So we're going to go into a little more detail in a minute of how this works. But right now we're about halfway through. Hope you're having as much fun as me. Take a break, get something to eat, go to the restroom, get some coffee, or if you have some questions, I will try to answer them. So Gail, I don't know if there are any questions or not.
So John, we have had a couple of questions, and they have been answered. There's a little more specific on the plants and the impact of some of the issues that people are having with their plants, like powdery mildew and fungus, things like that. So so those are getting answered. We had a great comment that back to your point on how many different publications that there are, and one of our attendees had recommended a recent National Geographic article that has information on microorganisms. So that was a commentary. But
Yes.
the questions are starting to come in now, John. So
Okay, good. Yeah, one of our colleagues told me about that National Geographic article, but I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. But he said it was pretty good. Yeah, there's a lot of interest in the microorganisms down there. I think we took them for granted for a long time, and I think now that there are new tools available to us as scientists to look into how these things all work together. And I think it's raising eyebrows, and I'll bring some of this stuff in a very simple form in a few minutes. So, but yeah, we should look at that. That's a good, because that will be written in a good style, I think, the National Geographic one. So
very good.
Should
we are
continue?
getting some very good questions coming in now. So thank you, everybody. One of the questions I think was be very helpful is, if the soil dries out, do all of the microorganisms die? How can they revive the soil?
Well, I suppose it depends on that. Well, it depends. I suppose it depends on how dry and how deep it goes. Yes, a lot of organisms will go away. If it's drying, they will go deeper. And if it gets completely dried out, what happens to them? They die. Most of the microorganisms will go into a dormancy. Like I'll mention in a minute, fungi have spores, which can last for years. Bacteria do the same thing. So yeah, if there's big changes in the soil, you can have a drastic effect on these microorganisms, but there's lots of them. That's the one thing. Keep in mind, there's millions, if not billions of them. So even if you lose a lot, unless your whole place completely dried out, and I would say in a completely dried out scenario, they would go into a dormant phase of spores. Now, how long they can live in completely arid conditions, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
So should we go on here and maybe I'll answer some of the questions that come in, or do you have another one?
Sure. That we can carry on. Okay,
we'll do that. Because maybe some of the questions that are coming in that I will touch on, maybe not, we'll see. But the microorganisms are really critical, but the way it starts is all with the plants and the sun. Here's a little plant biology that's absolutely critical to this process. And this is the plants in the sun, other known as photosynthesis. I'll bet everybody here has at least heard about it. Photosynthesis is an incredibly complicated set of pathways. When I was learning it as an undergraduate, it made my eyes roll. It's even more complicated now. But you know what? We don't need to know that complication. We need to know this. This is the basics of photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide, which is a gas, which we exhale, and factories exhale. So carbon dioxide plus water from the soil plus sunlight. Now, these three factors come together in some miraculous way, which I don't claim to understand all the nuances, but it takes place in these little green structures here called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are filled with chlorophyll, which is the thing that makes plants green. So chloroplasts plus these all come together and a miracle happens and sugar and oxygen are formed. I am not overstating this by saying, if you don't have this process going on, we don't exist, because we need this. Now, I'm going to take it just a baby step deeper. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of photosynthesis, but just a little bit deeper. What are other products of photosynthesis? They're called photosynthates. Sugar and oxygen are the big players because they're bolded here, you see that. But sugars break down. They break into component parts. And then other molecules are made from them along with minerals from the soil. Remember the importance of the minerals. So from that, you get things like proteins. Everybody knows proteins. I'll bet a lot of people today had a protein shake in the morning. Proteins, all kinds of proteins are made from photosynthesis. Amino acids are the little building blocks from which all proteins are made. So you get both of these. You get lipids, which are fats. They're a product of photosynthesis. Flavonoid is just, it's a signaling molecule. And I only put it on here because I'm going to mention it in a minute. And there's lots of organic acids, citric acid, malic acid, and all these acids that are critical to processes within microorganisms, within plant roots and everything. So all of these things are made from photosynthesis. What happens to them? This is really neat if you think about it. So carbon dioxide and sunlight and water in the chloroplast makes all those compounds that I mentioned. And they are used by the plant itself to support the growth, reproduction, and defense. Isn't that a neat system? The plant makes its own defense molecules, its own reproductive molecules. It does it itself. But there's about 25% of all those things I mentioned that go down into the roots and are exuded into the soil. They're called plant exudates. So what's an exudate? Some of you may be of my generation, and there's an old cliche about horses sweat, men perspire, and women glow. Well, no matter how you call perspiration, is it something that's exuded from our pores? And that's what an exudate is. The plant exudes all those molecules into the soil. And where does that happen? It happens in an area called the rhizosphere. Scientists always like to put Greek or Latin roots on words. Rhizo means root. So why didn't they just call it a root sphere or a root zone? I don't know, but that's what you could call it. It's an area in close association with these roots, just a few millimeters, where these exudates are sent out into the soil and where most of the microbes are. If you did a microbial count of all those numbers I gave you, it'd probably 10 to 100-fold higher here than out here, because they're working in concert with the plant roots. And in a recent, relatively recent, 2 years ago, very prestigious scientific journal called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And the author said, quoted as a direct quote, is that the rhizosphere is one of the most complex ecosystems on Earth. That's really saying a lot, in my opinion. Think of all the ecosystems on Earth, and soil is one of the most complex. That's why we need to understand it more. And where is the rhizosphere? This is called a soil profile. This is the soil horizon. This is the bedrock. This is intermediate. This is where the soil came from. It's still breaking down over time. This is more broken down. But this is the topsoil level. This is where the rhizosphere is. Yeah, there's roots down here. Most of the action is right up here. So what happens when you take a rototiller through this? Or you turn it over with a shovel? You disrupt all these interactions that are going on. Now, does that mean that you can't grow anything there? No, it does not mean that. But we are trying to talk about a sustainable ecosystem, whether it's in your backyard or that valley in Colorado, or in the park down the street, or in the Sierras, or in the grasslands, or in the shoreline. Something that's sustainable, that will take care of itself with minimal influence of us. So you don't want to turn this over too much, because it's right here. I like to think of the rhizosphere as a snack shack. Okay, here's the analogy. So this lady has decided she wants to buy a jalapeno cheddar corn dog. Now, I don't know about you. I think I'd rather get snake bit than eat a corn dog. But that's just me. If this was Cheetos, we'd be talking something completely different. Now, this woman wanted to buy a corn dog. So she goes up with $3 or whatever the price is, and she hands $3 to this gentleman with a hat backwards. She gives him the money. He gives her the corn dog. That interaction, both parties benefited. It's called symbiosis. That's really critical. So you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's what's happening in the soil with this universe beneath our feet. So let me put it in other terms. So what does the plant do? Plants produce exudates, and different plants produce different exudates. And these exudates do lots of things. They feed microorganisms, they signal them, they attract them, or they repel them, and they do other things as well. But these are just some of the main things. So the exudates from the plant do all these things to or with the microorganisms. So in the snack shack analogy, what do the microorganisms give back? They promote the acquisition of nutrients in the plant. They help the plant grow and develop, and they influence the plant defenses against diseases. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. This is the snack shack. This is symbiosis. This is so critical to plant health. I can't overemphasize it, how well this works. Let me give you an example. If you're confused by any of this, let me give you an example of nutrient acquisition. And we'll talk about nitrogen. Nitrogen, as probably all of you who are gardeners know, are very, very important to plants. They make plants green. They are important to photosynthesis. They do all sorts of things. 78% of the air that you and I are breathing right now is nitrogen. Plants can't use nitrogen gas. They just can't. Here's an analogy I do. Suppose you go out into the ocean in a motorboat or a sailboat, and you brought somebody along who had the picnic, and you go out in the middle of the ocean out here, way out, and then the motor fails or the wind dies down, and you're surrounded by water, and the person who brought the picnic forgot to bring the drinking water. You are surrounded by water, which you can't use. That's what happens with nitrogen and plants. So nitrogen is arguably the most important nutrient in many ways. So how do they use it? Remember, 25% of your soil is air. There's air down there. There's nitrogen down there. Plants can't use it. So the gas needs to be changed, or as they say in plant speak, it has to be fixed into a form that plants can use, ammonium or nitrate or something. Who does that? Bacteria do that job. There's families of bacteria specifically do that job. They change the nitrogen from the gas into the nitrogen the plant can use. Some of these bacteria are associated with legumes. Maybe you've heard of them, peas and beans and lentils. But let me show you an example of how this works. And I took a little bit of license here with my storytelling, but it's all legit. This is a fava bean. These are the fava bean roots. The soil has been washed away. When the fava bean is growing, it exudes, it produces an exudate called a flavonoid. I mentioned that earlier. The flavonoid goes out there and recruits bacteria. It says, we need you over here. The bacteria attach themselves to the root, and they then signal the plant saying, we need a home. Do something to help us have a home, and we'll give you what you need. So the plant produces these nodules. It's like a scab on a abrasion on your arm. The plant builds this nodules around gazillion bacteria in there. And those bacteria are taking nitrogen gas and make it into a form that the plant can use. Now, if you should, fava beans can be a cover crop. If you cut this fava bean at soil level, all this good nitrogen is there for other plants, for when you plant your tomatoes, when you plant your other things. This is really important. And this is whole snack shack symbiotic thing. The plant gives the bacteria nutrients. The bacteria changes nitrogen into a form the plant can use. This happens in other examples. I'm not going to go into detail. Phosphorus and sulfur are very important to soil health. And in general, they're unavailable to plants in most of the forms in the soil. But you add some fungus, and all of a sudden, these two critical things are made in a form that a plant can use. So who are some of these microbial players, this universe beneath your feet? Who are they? We've talked about them, but let's go just a tad deeper about what they are. Well, the bacteria we've talked a lot about. Those are the ones that are in such high numbers. 4 billion per teaspoon. They are the decomposers. They take dead animal bodies or dead plant bodies, and they decompose them, break them down into critical elements or nutrients: nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur, and more. They break it down and they incorporate all these things into their bodies. Into their body wall are all these nutrients. So what happens then to these bacteria? Bacteria don't live very long. They have a half-life of 12 hours to 24 hours, then they die. That's called lysis. The cell breaks open, and all those critical nutrients are released. Where? In the rhizosphere, right by the roots, where the plant can take them up. That's one way. There's another pathway, if you will, that's important, and that's with the protozoans. Now, relative size here. If a bacteria was the size of a pea, then a paramecium would be the size of a large watermelon. So they eat a lot of bacteria, but the bacteria incorporates all this into their bodies in a higher concentration than what this protozoan needs. So it has extra nutrients. What does it do with them? It excretes them. It poops them out. Let's get right down to it. Poops them out into the rhizosphere in a form that the plants can use. That's a pretty neat system right there. Here's another one, the fungi. They are really important to soil health. Now, we all know the mushrooms or the toadstools. These are the reproductive. These are the reproductive aspects of the fungus. I wouldn't eat these particular mushrooms. This one does funny things to your brain, but the psychedelic things. But nonetheless, the business end of the fungus is down below the ground here, down below the surface. And this is the business part of the fungus. Individual strands here are called a hypha. Many of them are called hyphae, and the whole bunch of them are called the mycelium. You may remember, actually in our recent past, when we actually had wet winters, and you could have very damp yard, you might go down there and have a board laying in your damp yard and flip it over, and you'd see something like this. Fungi particularly like to gobble up wood. But you would see that. That's the fungus doing its job. But here's the business end of the fungi. These are the hypha. They're like a net, a real dense network. Think of that 1 teaspoon of soil. Remember that teaspoon we had? That has several yards of these in there. They're everywhere. Don't walk on them. They're incredibly fragile. And they're like a hairnet. And they're critical to, remember I talked about the grape nut cereal aggregate idea. They help hold soil aggregates together. Aggregates are important to getting nutrients to plants and getting air and water down into the soil. Nutrients, here's a whole list of them, flow through these hyphae, which are narrow straw-like structures. So when the fungus dies, and it does, these nutrients all of a sudden become available to the plant in a form that the plant can use. Plus, it leaves a microscopic system of tunnels for what? Air and water. Remember the pore space of soil, air and water. Now, the last part of the fungus I want to talk about is really important. It's called mycorrhizae. Once again, Greek form, mycorrhizae means fungus root. And keeping in mind that scientists always like to put just unintelligible words together, the mycorrhizae fungi is called an obligate biotroph. And you're going, what does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means that without the host plant, it cannot survive. This is the host plant. I don't know what this plant is, doesn't matter. You see the host plant, you see the roots of the host plant coming down here and here and over here. All the rest of this is a fungus that needs that plant to survive. If it doesn't have the plant, it will not survive. It'll form spores and just sit there. And it's symbiotic with the plant. The plant gives it sugar, and the fungus gives it all kinds of nutrients, including phosphorus is one of the big ones. And of all the plants you have in your yard, pretty much the lion's share of them have these relationships. And you can see just visually that this fungus extends the surface area of the roots by 10 to 1,000-fold. That's critical in drought conditions like what we are in right now, because it enables the plant to get more water than if it didn't have this association. Mycorrhizae fungi are well documented in all kinds of things. It helps plants become established and survive. They are important in leaf, root, and shoot growth, and in the yield of whatever the plant is. If it's a fruit tree, a nut tree, oil, this fungus, through mechanisms that I don't claim to understand, it's far too sophisticated for me in my old age, but it does it. These mycorrhizae fungi, they say they colonize the plant. And here's how it works. So you have the roots of these plants, and they send out a signal, an exudate, to a spore, a fungal spore. The spore germinates and sends out a single hyphae into the root or around the root. They either actually burrow into the root of the plant or surround, doesn't matter what. But once these plants are colonized by these fungi, they are more resistant to environmental stresses, one of which we're right in the middle of, drought, salt stress. Salt is not table salt. Salt is it's just a chemical term for a positive and a negative charged molecule that come together to form a salt. Potassium chloride, ammonium sulfite, ammonium nitrate, those are all salts. Some salts in synthetic fertilizers, they get salts in other ways. We're not going to go into detail, but it can be a stress to plants, and the fungus minimizes that stress along with heavy metal stress. The fungus makes plants more resistant to root pathogens. There are bad guys down in the soil, but either through chemical means or physical means, look at that, it's a network. Maybe the bad guys can't get through that into the roots. And the fungus, in ways that, once again, I don't know the mechanism, makes plants less susceptible to opportunistic pests. Think aphids, something like that. Amazing what these fungi, and there's multiple types of mycorrhizae fungi. It's amazing what they do for the plant. Here's something, and this actually is state-of-the-art science, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it's actually really important. If you've been reading about soil and atmosphere and the sequestration of carbon, we have too much carbon in our atmosphere. And they're wondering how we can get more of that soil sequestered into the soil by the plants. Mycorrhizae fungi produce a substance, it's called glomalin or glomalin, however you want to say it. It's a glycoprotein, which means it's part sugar and part proteins. It's a sticky substance, once again, for soil aggregation, keeps soil stuck together. But here's what's really important. Glomalin stores up to 30% of the world's soil carbon. You're going to be hearing about soil and carbon and plants, and this fungus, which is in our flower beds, is important to storing that carbon. So how do you manage something as fragile as this organism and the bacteria? Well, minimal or no till. You don't want to dig this up too much. You don't want to damage them. You want to reduce nutrient input. Here's something maybe you haven't thought about. If you give that plant in this picture, before it has the fungus, if you give it some synthetic phosphate fertilizer, the plant loves it. It doesn't care where it gets the nutrients. If you give it to it, it'll take it up. But if it does that, it won't give the signal for the mycorrhizae to come in and colonize it and do all the other things. So you want to not put too much fertilizer down if you don't need it, because it can have an adverse effect on these microorganisms, and then it has an upstream effect. All these other positive things these organisms do are lost. And lastly, to manage these delicate microorganisms, bacteria and fungi together, use cover crops. Don't let your garden, I don't care how big the garden bed is, don't let it be bare. Have something growing in it all the time. If your tomato beds that you're almost done in another few weeks, put cover crops in there, put winter veggies in there, keep roots growing in there, because these are obligate biotrophs. They need roots to survive. Help them survive. Then we're almost done here. We have some larger critters in your soil. The invertebrates, the earthworm, the bigger nematodes, the arthropods. These are both arthropods. This is a mite, this is a millipede. These guys eat bacteria and fungus and pass through their nutrients through their intestinal tract into the soil, which can be used by plants. Or the bigger arthropods chew up organic material into little pieces, pass it through their intestinal tract. Now the bacteria and fungi can work on them. And of course, earthworms, they aerate soil just by crawling through there. They eat bacteria, they carry bacteria on their slimy bodies. They increase the water and nutrient holding capacity by opening up channels in the soil. And of course, their excretion is high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They're called earthworm castings. These are all positive things that help and work with the microorganisms. So what we should make of all this? I've given you a lot of information, maybe information that you really are interested in, maybe not so interested in, but what's the so what? I want you to remember a few things. First of all, soil is 50% solid, that's minerals and organic, and 50% pore space, air and water. That's really critical. Remember that. Remember that soil is a living resource. There's lots going on down there. A fully active soil food web facilitates better nutrient retention and is critical for the survival and establishment of plants. Why is that? Because the elements of the food chain take up the nutrients into their body walls. So they're not leached away by water like some of the synthetic fertilizers are. They're taken up into the bodies of the different microorganisms. And then when those microorganisms, are consumed or die, those nutrients are made available to the plant. So what should we do then to try to nurture, to maintain this universe beneath our feet? And I'm putting this up here just to remind us of what we're doing. Yes, we don't have it like this. All those things I talked about are happening in here and keeping this valley vibrant. And it's happening in your backyard. Use organic material, compost and mulches. In the webinar that Monica's going to give next month, going to talk more about the organic materials, the compost and mulches, the amendments. But use these organic materials integrated into your native soils. 2, disturb the soil ecosystem as little as possible. Limit or don't do any till. Now, am I saying there's never a time when you should chew up the soil and break it up and get the organics in? No, I'm not saying that. This clay loam that we have is hard. You have to break it up and get the organics into it. In our demonstration garden, we broke up the clay soil with a tractor. But over the last 12 years, we've integrated so much material into that clay. It's gorgeous soil. So Sometimes you have to till, but once your soil is going, once a soil food web is established, once we have something like this, not quite like this in your backyard, admittedly, but once you have it, then don't disturb it so much. Be stingy with fertilizer. Use only when needed. That's the utility of the soil test. Or if something starts going wrong, get a soil test. Don't just throw out something that you don't need. I know for a fact, in our new volunteer training, we have the students do a simple soil test that you can buy. It just gives you nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And we find that most of the soils in the county are very high in potassium and phosphorus. So you don't need to go buy a balanced 10-10-10 fertilizer because it doesn't need phosphorus and potassium. They need nitrogen, yes. But be stingy with fertilizers because they can have adverse effects on the microorganisms. Remember pore space. Remember that there's air in the soil. Don't walk on your beds, no matter what kind of bed. Try not to walk on them. If you have to get out on them, use a board or something to distribute your body weight so you don't crush that soil and push out the air. And remember that the various biocides are designed to kill things. That's what herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and miticides do. A fungicide can kill those critical mycorrhizal fungi. Also, photosynthesis brings life to the soil through all those exudates. So keep something growing in your soil all the time. In the winter, grow winter veggies or cover crops. And lastly, diversity reduces. Diversity is incredibly important. Most of our gardens are diverse. We don't have just corn or just tomatoes. We have lots of stuff. And plants have different exudates that recruit different microbial populations that do different things with plants. And diversity keeps more good guys than bad. And by simple competition, they drive the bad guys out. So I hope that you see soil in a slightly different perspective than you ever did before. And I know there's probably a lot of unanswered questions, but I want you to think about this whole universe beneath your feet. I want you to get out there and get your hands in it and to learn to love and to protect that universe. And I thank you for your attention. I hope that you got something out of this. And Gail, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you so much, John, for that, enlightening us on that amazing universe beneath our feet. So what an incredible discussion. And I can tell you from some of the comments that we've gotten, folks who have attended feel the same, that this has been a very worthwhile use of their time. So thank you. And just want to take a few moments to mention that we have a website. The Contra Costa County Master Gardener website is just filled with gardening information that you can continue to do more information gathering. It's very research based, so good information that you will find on our website. You can follow us on social media. So we've got our name is Coco MGUC. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel. So the wonderful thing is that after tonight's session, these programs are recorded and they will be available on our YouTube channel. So we invite you to check them out and see other programs as well. So these are the webinars that we've had so far this year, and we've got a few more coming up. So we would love to have you join us. As John has mentioned, we have an excellent discussion coming up in October on fertilizers and amendments. And I think that will be a natural kind of progression of this discussion. So we hope to see many of you show up for future programs. And then as the days get a little bit cooler and darker, we're going to turn our discussion to houseplants as we go into the house. So we'd love to see you join us for upcoming webinars. Registration is posted on our website and also on Facebook and our e-newsletter. In addition, the Contra Costa County Library will email with events that are up and coming if you're on the mailing list. So there's a number of ways to learn more about programs that we're offering, and our website is just filled with information out there. And if you didn't get what you needed tonight, you can always contact our help desk. So, this is going to be our last slide before we open it up to questions and answers. But John has created a wonderful handout with links to additional information regarding the soil ecosystem. You'll find information about testing, which is a question that came up quite a bit in the in our Q&A. So I would suggest that you either take a picture of the QR code, or also Serenity has put the URL link to the survey in the chat, so you can get access to it. And if you fill out the survey, once you get to the thank you page, you'll find the link to John's handout there. So highly recommend that you fill that out and get access to this information John has put together. So with that, I would say John, if you wouldn't mind if you'd keep it on that last slide, just because folks have come back and asked to get to the QR code. Okay. So we'll go back to that, the QR code. Yeah. Yes. Sorry. We'll linger on that slide while you do questions and answers.
Oh, okay, that's good.
Okay. Yeah. Great. So now we've got a few questions. So I've marked a few to answer during this session so that everybody gets the benefit of it, while our panel of experts have been typing furiously to folks behind the scenes as well. But many of the questions have had to do with when's the right time to test soil? Do I test one area? Do I test multiple areas? Can you talk a little bit? A lot of questions about testing.
About testing, yeah. Testing is a really good thing. One of the things, that's why you need a really good testing lab, and they will tell you how to get your sample. Usually in a flower bed, or if you have multiple beds, you want to take, not right at the surface, maybe a foot, or not a foot, maybe 6 inches down in multiple places in your garden, and mix it all together. And like say, the testing lab should tell you exactly how they want it done. And, you know, testing can be done right now if you think that, depending on what you're testing, if you're testing like the beds that your tomato were growing in, right now you would find deficiencies in certain things. So the plants are heavy eaters. So it kind of depends on, are you starting with a brand new bed? Like now would be, if you had a new raised bed right now, this would be a good time to test it. What is in that soil or not in that soil? And they would come up and tell you that. You would integrate, this is what I would do. You would integrate organics into your raised bed in your soil that you bought. And then you would, depending on what the soil test comes up, and you would plant cover crops for this winter right now. You would start planting them now or in the next month. And they would come up and survive through the winter, like fava beans and clover and mustards. And you just let them go. And they're enriching the soil that way. If you've had problems with a bed, let's say your tomato did really badly this year, and we had some pretty rough climate things with that horrible heat, but let's just say it's really been doing bad. Now, maybe now's the time to check what's it missing. So I guess I don't know that there's a better time or a worse time to test soil. If you have a brand new bed, test it now. If you have an established bed that you're concerned about, test it now. Or even if you're not concerned, even if you don't have any problem with the bed, but you just want to know what's there. But sometimes the plants let you know if things are going well. If the plants are healthy, if you're getting tomatoes, if you're getting cucumbers, your soil is probably doing pretty well. You may not need to test it. One of the things, this is kind of those, I don't know if it's a Farmer's Almanac type of thing. It's not necessarily research-based. But if you want to know if you have a healthy soil, go out and take a big shovelful and turn it over and see if there's any earthworms in there. If there are no earthworms in there, you might have a problem. I mean, not a serious problem, but it may not be a real healthy soil. If you have a bunch of earthworms in there, you have a really healthy soil. We find that in our demonstration garden. We turn over, there's earthworms everywhere. So that's I guess that's a long answer to the question. And the thing is, I think you test when you need to test. I know that's kind of not a definitive answer, but I don't think there's a wrong time to test. That's how I would put it anyway.
Great. Thank you, John. The next question is kind of a follow-on to some of what you're talking about. Is now that we've want to amend and improve on the soil. We've learned some things about the soil. The questions are around aerating the soil and tilling it, mixing it. If we're going to bring other material in, what's the best way to ensure that we don't disrupt in a negative way, even though we do need to bring some maybe amendment into
Yeah, usually if the bed's pretty good, but you want to amend it, you want to add some organics. One way to do it, most people don't have a broad fork. You might have a pitchfork or a hay fork, one of those with the sharp tines. You just shove that in there and lean back and lift the soil. By lifting the soil, some of the organics, the new stuff that you have, will fall in there. And that's one way to do it without terribly tearing up things. That's one way to do it. If it's a brand new bed, and you're integrating stuff, I think, yeah, you would till it in. You would shovel it in and turn it over. But if it's an established bed that's doing pretty well and you're just adding stuff, you can just disrupt it a little bit. That's one of those things. It's awfully hard to say absolutely or no. I think it would be foolish to say never, ever, ever till something, because sometimes you need to open it up. Sometimes things get compacted just by weathering compacted, water on it. So sometimes you have to open it up. And by opening it up, you're allowing air to get in there. You're allowing some of the organics to get a little deeper. And of course, the organics on the top are good because they're going to break down and go into the soil. Now, as far as aerating and breaking up soil, one of the best ways to do it is with cover crops, believe it or not. Some of the mustards and some of the grasses, the cereal grasses, go very deep. They'd be good cover crop to grow in the winter. They go down and they get into the clay and they break it up. I don't exactly know how they do that, but they do it. So you can use mustards, you can use cereal grasses. Some people have used daikon radishes. You know what, the big white radish, the big giant one. You can plant that and it drills a hole basically right down into the soil, and then you cut it off and it rots in there and it breaks up. So you can use plants to help break up the soil. Some people have said that with this clay loam that we have, that really hard clay soil that we have, that you don't have to do too much. Just scrape it up a little bit and put organics on it, put cover crops on it. But here's a caveat I'll say, in a few years, it'll be really nice. Now, some people don't want to wait a few years. They want to get it going now. So if it's the clay soil, you want to dig it up now, get the amendments in there. If it's an established bed, let the plants help you out. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, thank you. Question here is, the goal of the composition of soil having 5% organic matter. Is there a problem if the organic matter has a higher percentage, say up to 15%? Is there a downside to having more organics in the soil?
My gut feeling is to say yes, because we've had that problem in our demonstration garden, which got up to 15%, and we're backing off on new organics. But you know what I can't tell you? I'd have to think about that. What I can't tell you exactly why that is. I don't know. I'd be guessing, I think, and I'm a little reluctant to do that. Boy, I don't know. I can't answer that question well. I'd have to think about that, or maybe somebody on the panel knows more about that than me, about why too much organic. Usually that's not a problem. You really have to add a lot. We've been adding organics and composting in place for years before it got really high like this. So I don't think it's usually a real problem, but it could be. But I'm sorry that I can't give you a discrete answer as to why it would be a problem.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Another question is, why does dry soil not absorb water readily?
Oh, it's hydrophobic. It goes to the that's a tough one. It goes into the electrical properties and to and I'm not conversant with that, but I know it's an electrical thing. They get charged, and they won't let any of because water, the way water goes through is with an electrical process because it's a charged molecule. And so it just won't go through. And it's because I think it's electrical. I can't do any more than that because I don't know any more than that. And yeah, that's really hard. You find that in a lot of bagged, even the amendments sometimes are very hydrophobic. And sometimes that because they're forest products, and forest products have lignin in it, which is a very dense compound that repels water. So your best bet on that is just slowly integrate water, and it'll eventually break down those electrical forces, and it'll finally get into the soil. But sometimes, especially this time of year, if you have a hydrophobic soil, it can be really hard to get soil in there or to get water in there. Yeah, but it's an electrical process that does that, I think.
Okay.
They're good questions, but they're tough ones.
Well, I think you probably answered so many of the questions in your great presentation that only the really hard ones are left.
Yeah, the really hard ones there. Yeah.
So, let's see. This is a term that I'm not familiar with, John, so maybe you are, and otherwise we may have to ask the folks to contact our help desk. But please tell us more about bokashi, pros and cons. It's spelled B-O-K-A-S-H-I.
Yeah. I think I know what that is. I think that's when you dig a trench and you put a bunch of organic stuff in there like food waste. I think that's what that is. You know what? I can't answer that. I know we actually have some people on the help desk that are authorities on that, or they're very knowledgeable about that. I would ask them because I don't know. Once again, I would be guessing.
Yeah.
I think one of the negative things would it might draw vertebrates in. It might draw things that dig it up, if it's what I'm thinking it is. But I don't know about the pluses and minuses with respect to soil.
Okay. Here's another specific terminology that we might venture into. I heard that Dallas grass kills the biology of dirt. Is this true? And it's another DALLIS grass.
I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it.
Okay. No, I haven't.
I have no idea what that is.
Okay. Sorry, this is, I think we're at the stump the presenter portion of our talk.
We're absolutely at the stump the presenter part. But hey, that works. I understand that. But you know what? It's good that people are so interested that they have questions like this. That they're not just going, okay, they're actually going, oh, wait a minute, I want to know more about A, B, or C. I think that's really a good thing. And I really appreciate these questions, even if I can't answer them. But you know, they can contact the help desk with those questions, and the help desk people will really do the proper research and give them the right answer. They won't do a guesswork like I might be doing.
Okay, very good. Thanks, John. Another question is, can you speak to the dangers of working with soil without a mask or with bare hands?
Well, there are pathogens in soil. And so it's possible that you could get through a small abrasion or a cut, you could get the wrong type of bacteria. Usually they would be bacteria, I think. I don't think viruses would affect people, but there are bacteria, because it depends upon what's in the soil. If there are animal products, if there's animals around, there could be E. coli and other types of pathogenic bacteria that in theory could get into you. I don't know how common that is. As far as using a mask, I would use a mask if you're working with really dusty conditions, if you're using in the bad soil that may have a lot of aerosol type of thing. I think if you're comfortable wearing a mask, I see no reason not to wear a mask, because there's always a chance that there might be pollen, there might be bacteria, there might be things that you could inhale and could possibly. I don't consider it a major problem, but some people are very sensitive to certain things, to certain plants. And so if there were those plant byproducts there, it's possible. And I have seen if with the tree companies, with the tree stuff that they just pour out there, the chips that they have, they'll start to decompose like in a compost bin. And when you lift that up, all this stuff comes bubbling out of there. I don't know what that is, but it worries me when it happens. So, it's possible that there are things that could have an adverse effect. I think it's minimal, but it's possible. So I would, I think it's always safe to use gloves. And if a mask, if you're comfortable with that, I think that would be good as well.
So here's a fun question. Are there soil probiotics around to add? Powders, soil kefir, soil kombucha.
I don't know about that either. What I do know is, and this is a controversial thing, is that you can add soil microbes. Not so much the probiotics for the ones that are there, but if you don't think you have them. But it's somewhat of a controversial process in big agriculture has data out there showing that if you add mycorrhizae fungi spores to your field, you will get better productivity. That's in big ag, in monoculture. In home gardens, it's less clear. You probably have everything you want. But if you had a brand new bed with that hydrophobic soil that nothing's been growing in it for who knows how long, it wouldn't hurt necessarily to inoculate with some of these microorganisms. I'm not sure how viable they are. You can buy most of the organic fertilizers. If you look at the ingredients, they not only have NPK and some of the micronutrients, they have lots of bacilli, which are the bacteria, and they have lots of the mycorrhizae. How viable are they? I don't know. I asked one of our advisors at UC, if you have a garden bed that's doing okay and you added some organic fertilizer with new types of mycorrhizae, would they compete? Would they be a problem? He said he didn't think so. There's no data at all out there to suggest that. Some plants get infected, we call infected or inoculated, with many, many mycorrhizae at the same time. So they work in concert together. So you can add them, but I'm not sure about the probiotics for the ones that are existing there. I think the probiotics for the ones that are existing there are called compost or other organics. You add that, the microorganisms are going to benefit from that.
Very good. Well, John, we are out of time. So I want to say thank you very much to our presenter, John Fike, our amazing man of soil, and his team of deeply knowledgeable Q&A panel of Monica, Sarah, and Brian for working so diligently behind the scenes to answer as many questions as they could along the way. I want to say a very warm thank you to Serenity Dean and the Contra Costa County Library for co-sponsoring this event. And mostly, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate you coming to our talk tonight, and hope to see you in future. And by all means, get the handout. There's a lot of great information out there. So thank you, everybody.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.